leverage the things that make you an individual. So I like to think that I'm the unofficial ambassador to Ghana. That mentality that if you put in hard work, that you should be able to pay. Now, I think, I believe some of that, but the philosophy is also in terms of, you also have to know how to network and who you know and ask. And so for me, it was more about understanding that I do have to wear a mask. As a man, we all bleed the same way. So you should never be intimidated or afraid of another man. But to your point, you should only speak when it's necessary. So all of them have job boards. So for me, I always look at the job boards in the professional organizations and stuff associated with the work that I'm doing. Or even with LinkedIn is another way that I look at, what jobs are out there. I look at people's profiles to see what their backgrounds are in terms of how they got to some of these jobs and all that kind of stuff. Imagine there are 20 city council members. So I was one guy with 20 bosses. I answer directly to the president of the city council, to the city council meetings. And so it's their voices that are being heard. So there are things that we may want. Some of them are things that may actually benefit us. Like you will have counties and cities that will have small business loan programs. We don't take advantage of that. You can decide you want to open a restaurant or a specialty store. You can decide, hey, I want a small business loan. And some of them, the interest rates are almost zero. There's so many programs, whether it's, low income internet access for your kids at home, so that, there are so many services that cities and counties can provide that we really don't take advantage of. Because one, we may not know, and two, we're not at the table when some of these decisions are being made. So like with the pandemic, we got so much money from the federal government in terms of, loan assistance, mortgage assistance, all that kind of stuff. I can't tell you how many African families actually receive some of that money because we don't see them.
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Sa. I'm here again with you with another podcast. It is possible with Dr. Sa. This week is going to be great. I have a guest here who is going to share his experience. We want to learn about his work, how he got it into his work, how his day is like. The idea is to be able to be inspired, so we can all learn from how we are contributing to society as Africans in the diaspora. So without much ado, I'm going to introduce my guest. My guest is Dr. Kwesi Obeng. Dr. Kwesi Obeng, and he has a PhD in political science and government. He is the chief of staff for the DECOB, County Board of Commissioners.
Yep.
In the state of Georgia. I hope I got it right.
Oh yeah, you did.
Nice. So let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Obeng.
Thank you.
Nice. It's really great to have you here. So let me just ask, tell us about you. Who is Dr. Kwesi Obeng?
That's a complicated question. Well, first and foremost, I'm Ghanaian. I like to think that I'm the unofficial ambassador to Ghana. So okay. I was born in Senegal because my dad was working there, but my parents are both from Ghana. My dad is Ashanti, my mom is Kwewu from Abitifi. My dad is from Akukere. Born in Senegal, we lived in Ghana. I moved to Ghana when I was like age 6, and then I was there all through my O levels, and then went to the UK for my A levels, and then came to the US for university. So in Ghana, I went to Northridge Lyceum for elementary school. So, pretty prestigious school. Yep. And then
which part of Ghana did you live?
I'm sorry?
Which part of Ghana? So
actually, we lived in Asylum Down for a while, and then we lived in Airport West, and then moved to Laboni. But my mom is back in Asylum Down now.
I see.
Yep.
And in Senegal, have you lived in Senegal or?
Not since I was a child, but my parents have been back, so I still speak a little French. It's not as good because I don't use it as often, but Senegal is like
Ah,
my I claim Senegal when Ghana is out of the World Cup and Senegal is still in.
that is well. I would take that.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah,
be
yeah.
biased on this one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow, that's nice. How was life like for you? Growing up in Ghana, how was life like for you?
Yeah. For me, I really appreciate it because I think in Ghana, one of the things, and this was before, the education system changed to like the junior secondary school and the senior secondary school system.
Mm,
Back when WIAC had like common entrance and then we used to do the O levels and A levels, I'll say the academics were pretty rigorous. Expectations were high. Um,
mm,
you know, I wish things were a little better in Ghana now. There was a time when, even European countries and the US were recruiting Ghanaian medical doctors just because they recognize the rigor of the education and the discipline and stuff that Ghanaians had. And for me,
mm.
that's part of what I've tried to carry with me in my work, which I attribute a big part to where I am now. That kind of discipline, ambition, and recognizing that, one being black and two being African, you always have to
Mhm.
exceed and do four times the average person just to kind of get the respect that you want in your
That's right.
discipline. So, those are kind of the values that I've kind of taken with me. So, but other than that, living in Ghana was great. The food, I love Ghanaian food. And so for me, even being in Atlanta where there are a lot of Ghanaians here, it feels like home away from home. But I always try to go back
Wow.
at least once a year just to kind of keep myself grounded and remember if you remember where you come from, you always know where you're going and what the intent was. Interestingly
Absolutely.
enough, I didn't even expect to be in the US as long as I've been, but God always has a different path for us. So we'll see. Eventually I might be able to take some of my talents back home and be able to do something.
Wow, that's really great to hear that at some point, you have the aspiration of doing something, going something back home, which we'll get to into that in the next couple minutes. So, how long have you been in Georgia,
So
or let's say in
I
the states?
actually
How long have
so
you been in the states?
oh man, in the States for too long. I came to the States after secondary school in 95.
My
And
goodness.
yeah, so in 99, I graduated from college and then I came to Atlanta actually to come for medical school. And so I moved to
Mm,
Atlanta in 99 and then, of course, did grad school, changed courses from medical school and everything. But I left Georgia in 2014 and got a job in Chicago just because Georgia in the South usually doesn't pay as much compared to a lot of states in the Midwest. So I wanted to move to the Midwest, kind of bump up my salary, gain some more experience because I was working for the city of Chicago, which is the largest city, gain some of that experience and then be able to leverage my skills and experience and then move back to Georgia with
mm,
more responsibilities and a higher pay. So I was in Georgia for like
mm.
15 years, moved to Chicago, and then I was in Madison, Wisconsin. And then I moved back with this new job in 2020 during the pandemic.
How how did you get the opportunity to travel outside?
So my dad went to Infanspim and then, graduated from Legon and then he went to grad school in Amsterdam and then he was able to get a job with the UN. So I think that was one of the
Okay.
big, he was one of those kind of early Ghanaians who were kind of taken to work for the United Nations type thing. So, I mean, I recognize the
Okay.
privilege and the opportunities in that. But, my
Right.
dad always considered himself, even with working for the UN, that, he's a civil servant, even though he's an international civil servant. So,
Mm,
he kind of kept us, somewhat humble and kind of, maintain that hard work, because during his time and those who came like during the Nkrumah era, it was all about, that mentality that if you put in hard work, that you should be able to pay. Now, I think, I believe some of that, but the philosophy is also in terms of, you also have to know how to network and who you know. And I think as a Ghanaian and as Africans, that's part of where we struggle because we're not necessarily brought up in an environment where networking and making connections and all that kind of stuff is emphasized. And so that to me is probably the biggest change that I had to do to kind of adjust because I'm also more or less an introverted person, but I had to kind of get out of my shell and be able to network and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of
mm,
what created those opportunities. Of course, scholarships kind of help as well, but I think
What scholarship? So you got a scholarship?
yeah, so I was able to get a scholarship to get to school to do my A levels in the UK. I had to take an exam, and then I did get some scholarship, and then of course the US also compensates for some of it in terms of coming to the US. So I went to Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Initially, my degree was in biomedical engineering, believe it or not. I was,
Wow.
typical Ghanaian parents. I was supposed to go the medical school
Right.
route and then go back to Ghana and be a medical doctor, but
Let me say, you talked about being an introvert, which is so true. Being an introvert, and also compared to your father's era, which
hmm
that era, like you said, rightly said, it's all based on working hard. If
right,
you work hard, your productivity, your results will pave the way for you. And like you said, in today's world, it doesn't work like that anymore. It's
hmm
kind of shifted to the network. Who
right,
you know
right,
really is, the network. They would they always say your network is your net wealth, your
right,
net worth, right? So opportunity comes as a result of the people that are surrounding you. Being an introvert, I know it's not an easy thing,
right,
and I can rightly say that because I am an introvert 100% myself.
right, right,
And that's something that I also some time ago I also used to struggle with, really building relationship, building network. Like you're saying, as Africans, Ghanaians, in our upbringing, we really raised to respect, be in our lane,
hmm
kind of be respectful of others,
right.
and just focus on what we're doing. So you grow up with that mentality, but in this side of the world, it's totally different,
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so how shine light on it. How are you able to overcome being an introvert, that
hmm
side of personality, and also coming out, shining, using that to leverage with your network in your career?
Yeah. So I'll be honest. It's not an easy thing, but I think one, if you're black in America, you're almost kind of forced to kind of push your, get out of your comfort zone for one, because whether it's even dealing with other black people, or African Americans, or whatever, I feel like to some extent, for us to be acceptable and to be able to get into certain opportunities, we have to wear a mask. And so for me, it was more about understanding that I do have to wear a mask. And then if I have to wear a mask from, let's say, 8 o'clock in the morning to 6:30 in the evening, I have to take that time when I get home to really kind of decompress and, do whatever it is
Unwind.
that kind of brings me back to who I am and my
Mm,
core being.
mm,
Because
mm.
that to me is the draining part. Being
Right.
everything to everybody during the work hours, and then you have to come home and you have to be able to have that peace and be able to unwind and then kind of remind yourself why you're doing this, what your focus is, what your goals are.
Mm, mm.
Otherwise, you just get into some state of depression or something.
Absolutely. I can't tell you, as an introvert, the number of time I'm drained
Yeah,
just from
yeah. And I
meetings.
tell people
You
your
know,
social battery will be on zero, but like a
absolutely.
lot of times during the weekends, all I do is rest. And the only,
You
like,
know,
I would say resting and going to the gym actually kind of helps my mental health in that respect too. But I
right.
think, one of the things that I appreciate about this podcast is that one of the things that helps is knowing that you're not the only person who's kind of going through this kind of stuff, right? That there are other people.
Absolutely.
So, whether it's, if you're in a city where there are other Ghanaians and you guys can, maybe on a Saturday just go and eat some fufu or mutuo or whatever,
Right.
just to kind of reconnect and remember why we are here and all that kind of stuff. It does help.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For me though, after meetings, I always block after every meeting on my calendar. I always take like 5 minutes. I block it out just so I can really unwind
Oh yeah.
and kind of get myself back in that
Yep.
level before I even hop
Yep.
into the next meeting, because
Yep.
I realize, as an introvert, really, I mean, of course, there are great advantages to being an introvert, which sometimes, the way that this world is really built on the idea that you always have to be saying something. You always constantly have to be on the go, always constantly have to be ready to be assertive and be able to respond to issues. But as introverts, one thing that I appreciate is the fact that we're able to be observant.
Oh
We're
yeah.
able to observe, analytical, and even when we have the opportunity to speak, we're able to really give great feedback, valuable information, just because we've been able to observe. We really think through, analyze in our thoughts. So I'm very glad that you shared on that. Talk to me about being chief of staff. I want to hear how you got this opportunity as a Ghanaian. You have an accent, all the odds. This is reality.
That's part of wearing the mask, because I can talk to you as I am right now. But then when I'm at work, I also have to wear a mask where I speak a little bit differently, And I think one of the things that is a survival skill is that if you understand how things work in the US, people in the US a lot of people act off emotions. So if you're able to control your emotions, you're 90% of the way in terms of how you deal with people and handle people. That I think one of the things that I was taught growing up is don't let people know what kind of buttons to push with you, right? So that way you always have control of a situation. And then my dad will always say, look, as a man, we all bleed the same way. So you should never be intimidated or afraid of another man. But to your point, you should only speak when it's necessary and when you have something important to say. And, if that way people actually respect you. So to kind of give you a quick timeline. So like I said, I was here. The idea was to come and study medicine, go back to Ghana. But I didn't, I felt like medicine was more my parents' dream. So I was like, okay, I don't want to do medicine and, be struggling to get up to go to work every day because I don't like my job. Because I have friends who kind of went through that same process. So I was like, at that point, having taken the O levels and the A levels, all I'd focused on was sciences. And actually part of the reason why I wanted to come to university in the US was because, I did my A levels in chemistry, biology, and math. So it would have been easier to change majors in the US rather than in the UK system where you're kind of streamlined straight to medical school from secondary school, all that kind of stuff. So when I realized that I didn't want to do medicine, I was like, okay, you know what? Let me do psychology. Is the closest thing. Maybe it'll be a decent compromise with, the family. So after I graduated, I actually switched my major. I still did my pre-med courses, but I switched my majors to organizational development and psychology. So when I did psychology, I was like, you know what, let me do my master's in psychology. This was after I'd done a year of medical school, and I was like, nah, this is definitely not for me. I did psychology, got my master's, and I was like, during my clinicals and doing therapy and all that kind of stuff, I was like, this will bother me psychologically too much. So I'm not going to go ahead and continue to do the doctorate. But, at that time, so interesting story. So my uncle, who's my dad's younger brother, is PV Obing. So, and he used to be in government in Ghana. So he always used to tell me, follow your passion. You've always been interested about government and all that kind of stuff, because he had experience in government. So he was like, go ahead and pursue it and let your success be there. I told you so. If people are saying, hey, you should have done medicine and all that kind of stuff. So when I first did my master's in psychology, I got a job working for Child Protective Services, which was in kind of in government, because I realized that what I really wanted to do was to be able to help people.
Child protective. You people are the people that take people's children, right?
Legalize kidnappers. But, it's interesting because some of the stuff.
Every parent is afraid of you guys.
I know, but, most of the time there's really nothing to be afraid of. I mean, but it also exposes you to some kids going through some crazy stuff. But what really made me more aware of government was the role that government plays, even in Child Protective Services, in terms of funding and rules and regulations. You find out that government is involved in our lives in so many ways that we don't even understand, whether it's even telling you how you should parent, the resources that are available as a parent and all this kind of stuff. So at that time, of course, I was in Atlanta because I'd come to Atlanta to go to Morehouse Medical School. I decided to, kind of follow my passion. Actually started out of curiosity because I wasn't sure. I hadn't done any political science classes, so I wasn't sure if it would even be for me. But I registered at Clark Atlanta University, which is a historically Black college here in Atlanta. And I will say about half of the professors in the political science department are African.
Wow.
Yeah, and that is like a long history because even if you think of, Kwame Nkrumah coming to the US and going to Lincoln University, there's been this long tradition of Africans going to historically Black colleges and kind of building that kind of network. And to me, it felt like a comfort zone because it really, the mentality and discipline and trying to make a lot out of limited resources is no different from what you will see in like secondary schools in Ghana. Whether it's, the Cape Coast schools, there's this drive, hey, you have to be twice as good. You have to be disciplined in terms of academics because once you graduate and go into the world, society is going to challenge you, not just because you're Black or because you're African and they're going to talk about your accent and whether they can understand you, but people are also going to challenge your knowledge. So I got a job as a performance analyst for the city of Atlanta, which makes me, so basically what you do is you kind of go into all the different departments and do evaluations of their operations, It's not like a financial audit, but it's a performance audit. You study the operations, figure out which areas there are risks, whether there are areas where a lot of the city's budget is going to, and there's risk of fraud or waste, and then you go and kind of evaluate. So what it did was it kind of gave me insights into the operations of every city department, whether it's the parks and recreations or library or water department or police department, all that kind of stuff. And so that was very valuable. And I tried to do my best again. In every position, I feel like my work is not just representing me, but representing people that look like me and Africans. So, you don't want to go 100%. In and mess up and then make it look bad for other Africans and all that kind of stuff. So
absolutely.
I went in, kind of focused, aggressive, do my job, get out. I'm not there to make friends or, participate in office gossip. Just go do what I got to do and then I'm out. So, the opportunity in Chicago came and I took that one because Chicago is, again, an even bigger city than Atlanta and they have even more services, And
how did you come across the opportunity? Did you see it online or?
No, so what I did, there are a couple of things that I did. So because I already know that networking is a challenge for me, right? A lot of what I did was whenever I got a job, I always try to figure out what the professional organizations are and then get plugged into it. So when I started with the city of Atlanta, I joined the International City County Managers Association. They had a leadership program. I participated in that and got that certificate. And so with all these professional organizations, there's the Association of Local Government Auditors. I joined that one as well. So all of them have job boards. So for me, I always look at the job boards in the professional organizations and stuff associated with the work that I'm doing. Or even with LinkedIn is another way that I look at, what jobs are out there. I look at people's profiles to see what their backgrounds are in terms of how they got to some of these jobs and all that kind of stuff and kind of use that. Sometimes I can even just send an email to somebody, hey, I'm really interested in the kind of work you're doing. That's the kind of work I want to do. And it's easier now with emails and stuff because you don't necessarily have to be you don't have to be too extroverted. You send out an email. If they respond, great. If they don't, then, you're still at square one anyway, So, right. So I found that job actually through one of the professional organizations, and I'd applied to a few jobs just trying to get more experience and more pay that I could use to leverage. And my attitude was always, the worst that can happen is that they say no, and the best that can happen is you actually gain more experience in interviewing and getting some sense of what people are looking for when they're looking for certain jobs based on the kinds of questions that they're asking. So I got the job at the, city of Chicago, did that for a while. I was getting promoted in that area. And again, in these kind of associations, I realized that the city of Madison, Wisconsin was looking for a chief of staff to their city council. And this was a
Okay.
newly created position. They didn't know what they wanted for that position. Yeah, so the Gambian guy was the vice president, but I had to make my case not just to him, of course, because even though he's African, he doesn't know me, but he just was like, it would be a good opportunity to bring an African to this position. But I had to make the case that since this is a brand new position, they want somebody who's familiar with government operations, who can go to the engineering department, the water department, the police department, and be able to speak their language because he has done work with all these departments before. So
Right.
I was fortunate. Actually, I was in Ghana for Christmas holidays visiting my family when I got a FaceTime call because I told them I'll be out of the country, telling me that they were offering me the position for, to be the chief of staff to the city of Madison, Wisconsin's city council. So, I was like, this is a good opportunity. Very cold.
Yeah.
The winters were killing me, but I was like, you know what, I'll take it.
Did you go through phases of interviews and all of that?
Yeah. So the first interview was with members. It was a panel of community leaders because they were focused on trying to increase diversity in the government. So they had, community leaders who were like, members of like the president of the Urban League, the Latino Chamber of Commerce. So then after they did the first round of interviews, they sent recommendations to the actual city council. And so I had to do an interview with the executive committee of the city council, which was, I think, about 8 people. So yeah, when I got the job, it was interesting. I didn't even know what to expect, but then they also didn't know what to expect because it was a brand new position.
Right.
So it was
how many interviews did you do?
It was, so I had to do a kind of a written essay, and then there were two video interviews and then one in-person interview. So, so it was 3 interviews total. I think there were like 93 candidates, and I got the position.
My goodness.
Sometimes I think those other candidates who didn't get it were lucky because imagine there are 20 city council members. So I was one guy with 20 bosses. I answered directly to the president of the city council and the vice president, but then technically all 20 city council members are my bosses. So it was an interesting experience, but as a Ghanaian, it's like, hey, bring on the challenge. What have we not seen before?
We're going to figure it out.
Studying exams with no electricity and stuff like that. Some of the things that people consider to be challenges here, we're like, hey, we've seen worse.
This is our reality.
So
wow. How has life been? And tell me, what is a typical day like for you? Going into work.
Yeah.
I know it's probably crazy. I mean, you're answering 20 bosses in addition to president.
Yeah, it's what makes it interesting is one, especially the time that I came. So, DeKalb County, one of the things that makes it beneficial is that one is a predominantly Black county. 2 is suburban parts of the city of Atlanta, actually in DeKalb County. So we're definitely part of the metro area. DeKalb County is probably one of the more diverse counties in Georgia because when Georgia used to bring in, Somali refugees, we have like a huge Somali refugee community. We have a lot of Ethiopians, we have a lot of Koreans, Vietnamese. So it's very, very diverse. And I think for me, and this is something that people should kind of take to heart, leverage the things that make you an individual. So I actually took advantage of the fact that I'm a first generation Ghanaian in the US. I was like, especially if you're dealing with a county that's mostly Democrats, you're like, you want to be able to appeal to people who are new immigrants, try to get them active and see why being part of the government is important because government is supposed to be working for the people, not for us. So, not the other way around. And that's one of the things that I kind of took working with the Gambian council president in Madison. It was like, how do we get more Africans engaged? And it's the conversation that a lot of Ghanaians have been having. I know, like, if you look at Worcester, for example, in Massachusetts, there are a lot of Ghanaians there. And I hear every time the mayor is running for office. He actually goes to the Ghanaian churches because he knows that's the base. So, it's like we can leverage and get
it's the
more
same thing.
things.
When I used to live in Columbus,
when
I used to live in Columbus, kind of the same thing too.
Same thing.
Ohio.
Yeah. So if we're able to leverage that, not only can we get resources for Africans here in the US, but we can actually get resources back home. So, like, for example, when I was in the city of Madison, we used to do a lot of projects with the University of Wisconsin. And just because I was there and Samba, who's the Ghanaian, was there, we were able to get, medical supplies, like surplus medical supplies, create programs to get surplus medical supplies. And, we did like a sister city program so that we could have experts from our city go there to cities in the Gambia and stuff like that and kind of give them advice on setting up library systems, all that kind of stuff. There's so many projects. Like in Madison, they have the headquarters of Epic, which does medical billing and medical records. And we talked about, this is one of the things that Africa needs to be able to get a robust medical record system, electronic medical record. So how can we get contractors to try to go there and try to build some of these systems? So these are some of the things that we talked about. How can we leverage our influence here and our connections to be able to improve conditions, not just here, but back home? So, and even talking about defects, like if we have a family that, gets into trouble with, the county because of social services that, they're complaining that they spanked their child, we can actually intervene and kind of help with some of the cultural awareness stuff, or talk to the family about resources, things that they can do. Like, hey, if you go and take these parenting classes, the juvenile judge will kind of see that in a positive way, those kinds of things, so that people are not necessarily afraid of governments, but can also let government work for them and use the system the same way Americans themselves do. So that's been one of our goals and part of my goal actually in working in government. So it's been good. The thing is, I would say Nigerians more than Ghanaians, but even here in Georgia, Africans are really doing a lot of great things here. So it feels good because you kind of feel like you're in some pretty good company. Like this past election, I think there were at least 3 or 4 Nigerians who have been elected to the Georgia House of the Georgia State House. Yeah. Wow. So to go back to your question about how it's been, I think it's been pretty positive, in terms of just trying to move the needle forward. It's been kind of crazy because, again, like I said, 2020 with the elections, the county has, kind of runs elections processes. So it's been very busy with, people wanting to challenge Georgia as a battleground state and elections, having to manage all that. So it's a lot of work, but it's never a dull moment. So every day we'll have different challenges. Today it could be something to do with the water department. Last week when we had the deep freeze over here, there are a lot of pipes that burst. How do we manage that as a government, kind of messaging and making sure resources are going where they're going. Again, funding for elections, funding for the county courthouses, the probate courts, all that kind of stuff. So it gives you, again, a lot of insight into what the challenges are. And then as you go back home, it's like, hey, these are some of the things that you can be doing better. And that's more of what I want to do kind of in the coming year, be able to go back and say, at this point, I have almost 20 years of experience in government that I should be able to go back and say, these are the things that you guys are doing. You can actually be more efficient and save money and not necessarily always hire consultants from the World Bank and all that kind of stuff. Because we have experts who are here who have lived and know what it means, the cultural nuances and all that kind of stuff, and can actually come up with solutions, African solutions for African people.
I know you have mentioned you have plans of going back home to also get involved politics. I'm not sure what level you want to, get involved, but what do you intend to do back home?
So honestly, back home, and to me, when Nana Addo first became president, a lot of what he said is kind of what I've always believed. Brain drain.
It resonated.
Yeah, brain drain has always resonated. African independence and coming up with African solutions for African problems rather than always looking to some Western model to,
Yes.
It's always been my drive. So for me, I think part of what I struggle with is that, and this is not just in Ghana, but broadly speaking, politics in Africa is so cliquish. It's like if you do work with one party, then the other party doesn't want to do work with you. And to me, I don't want to assign myself to a party. I just want good work to be done. I want the best qualified and the best ideas to be presented to move the country forward, and not just, well, I'm only working with this person because, they're part of my party or they supported me. Because at this stage, I don't think a lot of countries in Africa have reached that kind of political maturity to where we can have major ideological differences. We still have to. We're still trying to deal with our Maslow's needs of basic needs.
Right.
So sometimes
one thing I.
No, I was just going to say, sometimes when I hear the conversations in Ghana about, they're talking about the laws for LGBTQ and all that, I'm like, it's just disturbance, because there are major issues like youth unemployment and stuff like that should take precedence over any of these things. So to me, that's part of what I've been focusing on, not just, political rhetoric, but, how do we get people to work? How do we, cut back on the reliance of China or the US or whatever, and actually get Ghanaian people doing some of these things,
solving our own problems.
Exactly.
At what point do you see yourself really actively being engaged in governance in Ghana?
So I'm actually, I've been doing it a little bit now. Like, I try to make connections. Unfortunately, a lot of the connections that I have are with majority of the people in Ghana in government that I know that I have engaged with are all like in their 70s and 80s. And so there's also that kind of generational shift, right? So I'm really looking for, young leaders who are visionaries, who are not necessarily thinking about just their own self-gain, but I've written papers, and to me, it was just a matter of, how can I get in touch with the right candidates who can actually buy in and not just talk to talk, but it's like, okay, how do we do this? How do we execute this? So, I'm available. I've spoken to people in NPP. I've spoken to people in NDC. I've spoken to people in, CPP, all that kind of stuff. But,
And what has the feedback been like?
As Ghanaians, we are polite. So when you're talking to them, they will always make it seem like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, we should stay in touch. But the follow through is never there, and to me is like, I think one of the challenges, one of the fears that I've always had was that there's always this tension of, oh, you live abroad, so you think you know better, or there's always going to be that tension. And to me, I haven't let it dissuade me. I will put the information and, my expertise out there. If somebody actually wants to make use of it, I'm always there, but it's hard to actually build something if you're not on the ground. That's why I try to make more of an effort of, going back. Every time I go back, trying to see if I can make some connections with people and stuff like that, or see what, some of the people who are my mates are doing now. Unfortunately, most of them are not even in government. They're all trying to do their private contracting businesses and all that kind of stuff. But once I get to the stage where I feel like, some of the people who are our mates are actually in government doing stuff, and you can actually get some FaceTime with them, and they're actually interested in moving stuff forward, hopefully there'll be progress. But I think right now it's just a matter of the right opportunity and the right time.
I see. Yeah. Makes sense. Tell me, with your job, what is the most challenging aspect of it?
So the most challenging aspect, honestly, is that I have 7 bosses who are all, elected officials. So they are kind of accomplished in their own rights, and they all have their own policy ideas and all that kind of stuff. And you have to kind of work with all of them to come with cohesive plans that they can move forward. So a big part of what I do is, they may come up with, they may say, hey, we want to find, I'm trying to think of a classic example. Let's say, they want to come up with a strategy to increase voter participation in the county.
Okay.
So part of what I do with my team is like, okay, what are the demographics, what are the areas, and the people who are not participating, what are other cities and counties doing, and then really coming up with proposals, pros and cons. My position has always been, don't tell elected officials what to do, just give them the options, and then they're the ones who are voted by the people, they can make decisions. But a big part of it is actually going out and engaging. For me, engaging with immigrant communities is probably what I enjoy the most, because people will see me and be like, hey, so you're from Ghana and you're in government. And then it's like, just because you're from a different country, don't feel like you can't participate in the system here.
Impact. Right.
And so, whether it's, one of the cities in our county, Clarkston, actually has an Eritrean and a Somalian on their city council. So I can talk to them and be like, look, how do we get our people to come out and vote and actually kind of push their values, whether it's for law enforcement, public safety, simple things like being able to get potholes filled, or, the trash pickup. These are things that impact us every day, but we can bring our voices to the table so that it's not always, because typically the people who are most active are retired white people who are always at the, they always come to the city council meetings, and so it's their voices that are being heard. So there are things that we may want. Some of them are things that may actually benefit us. Like, you will have counties and cities that will have small business loan programs. We don't take advantage of that. You can decide you want to open a restaurant or a specialty store. You can decide, hey, I want a small business loan. And some of them, the interest rates are almost zero, where if you want to sell shito and make shito and sell them in jars, come up with a business plan, apply. There's so many programs, whether it's, low income internet access for your kids at home, so that, there are so many services that cities and counties can provide that we really don't take advantage of, because one, we may not know, and two, we're not at the table when some of these decisions are being made. So, like with the pandemic, we got so much money from the federal government in terms of, loan assistance, mortgage assistance, all that kind of stuff. I can't tell you how many African families actually receive some of that money, because we don't see them, Now, if some of them, if they were like in Madison, we actually had a more organized African association. Yes, they had sub associations, like, you have the Ghanaian Association, the Gambian Association, the Kenyan, and so, but under the umbrella of the African Association, they can come and say, hey, we want to get a community center so that we can help people, whether it's with immigration or support. If they're international students and they are struggling, we can provide them services. We can help with, we get grants from the federal government for mental health for communities. How do we talk about mental health in our immigrant communities, whether it's people who came from Congo or Cameroon or war-torn areas, to kind of get them reintegrated into society and deal with some of their traumas and all this kind of stuff. There's so much money and resources, but we don't get them because we are not there actually participating or voting for the people who will be able to advocate for those kinds of resources and apply those resources. So, that's where I like to come in and say, hey, we have this grant. If you're trying to start a daycare, or, we have Africans who are doing, elder care, there's this pot of money that you can apply for, you can get. Or if you're trying to convert your home into an elderly patient care place, you have to go through the permitting process. This is, I'm here, we can talk to you about permits. This is the process you want to go through. Or, you have a lawn care business and you want to be able to be a vendor for the county so that you can mow the lawns in like places near like the water department and all that kind of stuff.
How is the community in Ghana, in Georgia like?
In Georgia? It's a good, so when I first moved here, there weren't a whole lot. Most of the Ghanaians were either, the older people who had been here for a while, like a long time, like old school Ghanaians. And then there was this new segment of people who just came to Georgia because of school. So there's been like a generational divide. But now You're definitely seeing a lot more Ghanaians. There are quite a few who have been born and raised here. And I think now, just because of the culture and everything, a lot of people are trying to get back in touch with what it means to be Ghanaian. So it's getting there. It's getting there. We still have the Ghanaian churches. We have some pretty good Ghanaian restaurants and stuff like that. But I still would not say, there are a few Ghanaian communities. Most of them are based on people who came here in the 80s, and their kids have been raised here, and so they created these Ghanaian associations just to try and keep their kids kind of connected to the culture. But for people like me who kind of grew up, in Ghana for the most part and moved here, there's some recognition, but there still isn't that kind of cohesion within the community, But me to be honest, I think based on some of the work that I do, I'm actually not out in public that much,
That's really surprising, though. I mean, for somebody in public service, that's like opposite.
I don't want to be in the news. I don't want to be in the news. Yeah, but anyone who knows me knows that, hey, my love for Ghana is definitely unwavering. So I support Ghanaian restaurants a lot over here, and that's where I meet a lot of people. But a lot of there are fewer Ghanaians who are kind of in my age group. I'm 46, so there are fewer Ghanaians. Most of them are either late 60s or like 20s, early 30s. People have heard of Atlanta being like this big happening partying city. So there are a lot of people who are moving here straight from college. So there's still that kind of generational gap. There's still a few who are like my age group and mates who are, kind of keep their head down, have their families and just focus on their families and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, most of the time they're either very, very young, still kind of partying and early in their career, or it's like more kind of older, settled Ghanaians, So.
Wow.
But the Ghanaian church is still a strong institution here, UGCC and all that kind of stuff. So
wow.
They always,
and
there are ways to connect. Like Ghanaians too are conconsa and a little nosy. So I love my Ghanaian people, but also I moderate the interaction. But but you meet some people who kind of have shared experience. People who went to St. Augustine's and stuff like that, or Achimota and here, and you guys could talk about Ghana and talk about politics and how things can improve. And sometimes it helps boost the spirit and motivates a little bit. But
absolutely, wow.
But it's like everybody kind of has their circles. Yeah, and I guess because Atlanta is a relatively big city, that's to be expected. But,
I truly really appreciate your time being here.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.